Good morning, everyone. Firstly, can I say thank you very much for attending the Montgomery Group series. Can I just check that everyone can hear me? If someone can comment on the right-hand side on the chat, that would be very helpful. So let's just...
Good morning, everyone, as well from my side.
They'll probably, hopefully, all just get through in one go. Okay, so I think yeah, we've got some great. Okay, so everyone can hear us. So just quickly, we'll give it just a couple of minutes, just because obviously we're bang on time, and want to make sure that everyone who is wanting to attend is here. So we just give it a couple of minutes just to give it time. That'd be great. So just bear with us and allow as many people to join as possible. That'd be good. So just give it a little bit longer. You're running by English time, I think, where I am, whereas we need to be accommodating to the Kenyan time.
Yeah, true.
So I think let's get going. Firstly, can I just say I hope that everyone's healthy and safe and in as good spirits as possible. Obviously, it's not the easiest time for all of us around the world. I think this is the one time in ever really that we're all literally in the same boat as each other. And so because of that, I hope that everyone is in good spirits, healthy, and I'm hopefully looking forward to this all being over so that we can kind of get back to some semblance of normality, or whatever the new normal will be after all this is over. Just to firstly introduce ourselves, who we are the Montgomery Group. We're based in London, Nairobi, the rest of the world. And primarily what we do is run trade exhibitions and events. The one event that we were due to run in March was ProPack East Africa. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, that had to be cancelled. But because of this and this cancellation, we're trying to, in this medium time of not being able to meet face-to-face, try to put on these webinars to kind of allow people to continue to talk, allow the conversation to run. Since we run international events and we kind of get people around the world to meet to promote their products and services, this understandably isn't exactly the flavor of the month. So we've had to kind of shift our thinking. But what we want to do is continue serving our world, nurturing the relationships that we have, and developing opportunities for our clients. And so we put on this series of webinars once a week on this platform. We have other events and other webinars that happen concurrently as well. But we just want to try and allow a platform for discussion to happen whilst we're all sat at home or in our respective offices in some form of lockdown, wherever we are. Just a few logistical things. Firstly, for your user experience, if you can all on the bottom switch the video to 360 DPI off HD. That will enable you to probably have a quicker internet speed if anything does happen. So that's for the users. It just helps your bandwidth, I guess. Additionally, at the bottom, we've put a couple of polls. This will help us kind of see a bit more about who you are and also about kind of where you're from. So do fill in the polls. We'll reference those maybe later on as well. But if you could, that'd be great. We might add some more in as we go, but we'll really see how we go. There's the chat feature on the right hand side, so do make comments, do ask questions here as well, and if there's some good questions, we'll put those into the questions feature at the bottom, which again, feel free to add in if you have any good questions that you would like to ask Keiran. Finally, this is due to last about kind of half an hour or so. It's obviously we'll see how everything happens, and we've got a chance for questions afterwards and things like that. So but it won't be going on for hours and hours, so please don't worry about that. But now, finally, if I could just introduce Keiran. Keiran Smith is co-founder of Mr.Green. But yeah, I think it's, since he's here in person in digital form, it's best for him to introduce himself and let him talk a little bit about who he is and what he's doing.
Thank you, Alex, so much. Hello, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Keiran. I'm co-founder and CEO of Mr.Green Africa. Good morning to all of you, wherever in the world you are, or good afternoon. And pleasure to be here, talk a little bit about a hypothesis question we have put here and prepared here for all of you. And thanks for showing up and your interest. So a bit about me. As I mentioned, I started this business with my co-founder Keiran a little bit more than 5 years ago, with essential idea that the future of business as force for good is where we're heading as economies, and so we, especially around the plastic waste, we saw huge opportunities to approach it from an environmental force for good, but also from a social force for good. And especially in emerging markets, I think, where we have the opportunity to leapfrog into sort of a new circular economy, is why we're sort of ventured into this business. And we're able to establish a couple of very key elements in what sort of Mr. Green is about. And let me just touch on that. I hope everyone can see my screen as I dive into the presentation today, where, of course, I will talk a little bit about Mr. Green Africa and our key value proposition that we have been able to establish over the past years, and then dive into a more sort of questions around how does it work, how best practice examples with some of our partners, and just walk you through a little bit sort of the process and how ultimately trying to answer this hypothesis question of if COVID-19 can accelerate the shift towards a localized and a closed loop circular plastics economy in Africa. Yeah, so that's really what it is. And please feel free to ask questions, and we're trying to poll those questions. And as we go on, yeah, we enjoy it, hopefully. So let me get into sort of what Mr. Green Africa is about. Really, I think if you look in the context, when we started out, there was no big questions around, or talks about circular economy or plastic waste as an issue back in 2014. However, there were two important pillars that we sort of started out with, is the inclusiveness of informal markets that are engaged in plastic collection and trying to sort of earn an honorable living out of it, and then the other side of the value addition of such plastic. And on both elements, we saw big gaps on how we can do this better. And this is how Mr. Green really was able to venture into this, today we call it circular economy, into a plastic value chain in African markets with high quality products, but also with a very clear social angle and an inclusive way. So you can think of the fair trade element that you would see in tea, banana, coffee industry, where smallholder farmers get included. In Mr. Green, our smallholder farmers are waste pickers or informal collectors. Yeah, and there's sort of three key value propositions that we have sort of identified for the business. One is the socioeconomic empowerment for the informal market, transitioning them from informal to formal, and ultimately create a better quality of life for them. And then the second part is the high quality aspect. So as we move up in the value chain, and as we bring plastic and plastic waste, and I'll get into more about when we talk about quality there later in the presentation, but as we think through how can we go into the highest and best application of such plastic waste, it needs a certain form of value addition and higher quality. And as we create this quality, we can redistribute the value that is being created upstream to the people who collect it. And then the second big part is that we don't want to sort of extract again a resource in the country of origin and do the high value addition in another country. No, we believe in this being done local. And so that's why the third pillar for us is this local availability at local cost. It's a super important value proposition for the concept and what Mr. Green is standing for as a whole, but also a very clear value proposition for the partners and the people and customers who we work with versus imported plastic virgin material potentially that we're trying to substitute here. Yeah. A quick touch on the SDGs that we all know and we all talk about. I think we just want to outline here that this business very clearly also touches on the business model itself, touches on 7 very important SDGs. I won't go into much more detail there, but please feel free if you have any questions. We will share my details and we can get into that more on the SDG part, but also, of course, on the broader value proposition of Mr. Green Africa. With that being said, I want to jump into the solution of the hypothesis that we have put in the question and why we're here today. Is we have a best practice model with our key partner Unilever that we've been on a journey with for the last 3 years, and it's been a great experience. And the big milestone just before this unprecedented crisis that we have gone in as a world, we were able to launch the very first, or Kenya's first home care product made out of 100% PCR. PCR, what does that mean? Is post-consumer recyclate. As the recycling industry has been there for multiple decades. However, what is the Champions League of recycling is using post-consumer recyclate in your process. And so that's why it's a very clear focus and distinction between general recycled material and PCR, post-consumer recyclate. And we're so proud and so happy that we were able to achieve that milestone together with our partner Unilever on that. So here's some impressions on from a photo perspective. So there's a physical product in the shelves today that so for my Kenyan fellows here in this chat, please go out there and buy some Sunlight bottles that are made out of 100% PCR at the quality as it will be as virgin. And to touch on that, I think this really feeds in, and this is sort of a live example, a practical example of a global trend that is happening, an ecosystem that is evolving with brands such as Unilever being the pioneer in this, leading the way on being more sustainable in their plastic footprint and therefore, of course, reducing their footprint and, of course, using as well recycled material to keep the plastic and the resource in the closed loop. Yeah, and so just here, why is Unilever really using 100% PCR in their packaging? There are some Unilever global goals that you can see on their website as well, but of course, this is also something that is very, very crucial for them to change and shift the system in a systematic way. And so that's really on this best practice model that we're super proud of, and to showcase that it is possible that we can go into a circular economy. Now, what is this theory change? And if we go back to the question, how does that have to do with the acceleration of a shift towards a localized and closed loop plastic value chain in emerging markets, or more specifically in Africa? And here are some elements that we want to sort of dive into as a company and sort of tell that narrative. Pre-COVID, I think there have been pioneers in this space like Unilever, Coca-Cola, all the big brands are trying to sort of move their products and their packaging towards a more sustainable way of doing it from a collection perspective, but also from being part of the solution. And being part of the solution, of course, is creating a very clear demand for recycled material in the packaging to keep it in the loop. And before COVID, I think there was a trend, and there were trend lines that facilitate that ecosystem that is very fast growing, but the industry was very slow in adapting these new changes, and we were only able to work with pioneers in that space. However, if we look now, because of COVID, of course, we had a certain increase of demand for certain type of packaging, especially for essential goods that are mostly packaged with plastics. And so we can witness a very clear spike in demand of such products, and therefore also for the packaging, and ultimately also for the raw materials to produce those packagings. However, also what we know, because the whole world has been affected, supply chains have been disrupted, or potentially even will be disrupted, depending where we are and how far we are along with sort of the COVID crisis. And therefore, we also see some disrupted supply chains. And if we look at Kenya, that could also mean sort of slowdown or delays in imported virgin materials. Now, because of that, we believe that this could be, during COVID, could create a much bigger openness on the broader industry level to use high quality recycled plastics in their for the packagings and for those products. So really supplying now these shortfalls into these value chains of a high quality art plastic could be super, super interesting and a game changer. And ultimately, how do we get come out of this? So if we look at post-COVID scenario, I think the value proposition of using our plastic can clearly outweigh just the shortfall of availability of virgin material. I think there's so many more benefits, and there's two very important benefits that we see as a company that are there from a value proposition perspective. Number one is, as we create a closed loop circular economy in Kenya and or other emerging markets, we also create jobs and taxpayers. So that value proposition of business, again, force for good, where multiple stakeholders are included, direct and indirect jobs, is a very big one. And then the second one, we've also seen lately in the past few years, many governments have stepped up their games and putting pressure on the industries, plastics industry in particular, when it comes to policies around plastic pollution, etc. So the industry is actually also demanded to adapt and change their way of they're doing things and coming away from a linear model into a more circular model. Yeah, and so those two elements, I think, using recycled material or PCR in your value chain are a clear value proposition to switch over. And if there's no compromise of quality, why should you not continue doing and using it even post-COVID times? So this is our theory of change, and this is how we sort of want to lead the narrative into this question: can COVID accelerate the shift towards a local closed-loop plastic value chain? Now, very briefly, I'll touch on some alliances and strategic partnerships that we were able to deliver with two global brands, Unilever and Dow, where we're trying to, with both partners, look into the collection infrastructure and try to sort of feed that back into the system in a sustainable way and a profitable way, and then also, of course, bring it back into sort of the value chains and create a closed loop plastics value chain in products. And then, of course, we rely on local partners and international partners that help us getting us there. So one big thing is, in this value chain, we have the raw material, but we still need to work with converters. And maybe they're out there in the chat. We have some converters out there, and please mention if you're there and if you're sort of have a experience already with recycled material or you intend to use it. So that would be amazing, because with Blowplast is one of the bigger converters in Kenya, who's sort of leading the way with us and pioneering the way with us on that, to make that happen and go towards a closed loop industry. And then we also, of course, had to work with partners, hardware technology partners like Arema, who's enabling us to get this high quality. So from our system, our fully integrated value chain, we are able to achieve these targets through the technology provider. And then finally, how did we get there from a quality standpoint of view, I think is one really big element. That was a journey on achieving this quality. And so we partnered up with the Johannes Kepler University in Linz in Austria, who has some experience on quality control and improving the quality ultimately for the business. So 1 second for me, please. I just need to charge my laptop. I just saw that it's running out and my battery's broke, but all good now. Yeah, so these are the alliances and the strategic partnerships that we have been able to form, and of course we believe all in collaboration when it comes to creating a closed loop and sustainable and local plastics value chain. So let me touch a little bit on quality standards and application. Mr. Green Africa at the moment currently focuses on three key plastic products. The number one is the one that everyone very much knows, is the PET, made mostly in water and soda bottles, and producing these high quality flakes in the washing process, sorting them first by type of material and then sorting by color, allows us to feed them into various different angles. And these flakes are going into various different applications, back into the bottles, in the international market, into egg trays application where you basically your egg tray holders, but also textile and strapping industry that are more sort of logistical elements. The second big one, and this is sort of the best case practice that I've mentioned with the sunlight bottle that we have launched with Unilever, is on the HDPE side, coming mostly from cooking oil containers or shampoo bottles, or detergents elements, where we produce now with the Arema machine a high quality recycled pellet made out of HDPE, and feeding that back into these markets and applications. And the third one is sort of the PP material that is mostly coming from your yogurt cups, bottle tops, margarine tops, etc., and also bringing them back into the loop that are non-food application for now. That's what sort of Mr.Green is doing as a business, yeah? And I will finish, we're almost done with the presentation, but one thing that I would like to highlight for our audience is, how does that work? Anyone who would love to start using PCR in their value chains and processes, Mr.Green has established a sort of an onboarding process on how to get there, to get our materials into your value chain, but also how you can be very conscious and do that in a phased out approach and not just go from 0 to 100. And so the first thing of it is, of course, analyzing the portfolio of packaging that the partner has and would like to include, recycled material, food, non-food, application, exposure, etc., and also try to already look a little bit of, is this packaging already designed for recycling, right? So thinking of, can I design it that I can also bring it back into my loop? That's number one. The second step is establish a roadmap together on which of this portfolio can be transitioned into using PCR. And we would start slow. We would start with 25%, move up to 75%, and if where possible, even go all the way up to 100%. The third step is going into a trial and an approval process. So for example, with our partner localized, we've been able to achieve that together with Unilever and get that done, do trials, inline testing, see the product physically, test it with external parties and laboratories in Europe, South Africa, etc., and see the outcomes of it. Is it safe? Is it meeting the standards and requirements that the packaging has? And then finally, digging in more into sort of the commercials, pricings, volumes, and quantity structure that we want to do together and commit to a sort of more long-term plan, so Mr.Green also can serve as a supplying partner on that basis. And then finally, of course, launch it and roll it out and tell the world about it, that it's possible, and be recognized as the pioneer. So those are the really 5 steps: analysis of the portfolio, establish the roadmap, moving from gradually 25 to 100%, do the trials and approvals with external parties, figure out the commercials, and then do the launch and roll out into other products. Yeah, just quick win. We don't have too much time, but I think sort of the roadmap, I won't tell you too much of the journey. If you want to learn more about Mr.Green Africa's journey, please feel free to, again, reach out. But I think one key element here that I want to highlight that we're also super proud of is the informal market. Since the inception of Mr.Green Africa, we have paid out $750,000 to informal waste pickers since we started. And I think this just shows how direct impact this can create of creating livelihoods and jobs. We're working roughly with 2,500 collectors that have been registered in the system. We've directly created 110 jobs in the business, so we're running at 110 employees, and we have an installed capacity of 300 metric tons per ton. So that's just a little bit of an overview of the business. And with that, I thank you for your attention. And asante sana, as we say in Kenya. Please feel free to ask your questions and interactions.
Great, Keiran, thank you very much. I'm just going to close your presentation just so that we can host it together.
Sure.
There's a few questions that have been asked. If anyone does have any, please can you ask on the right-hand side, and we can kind of sift through them and put them to Keiran. But just, yeah, looking at the questions that were on there, there's one from a gentleman called, sorry if I say this wrong, but Delphi Rowe, sorry, about what the pricing gap between PTR and virgin solutions is, really.
Sure. I think at the moment the industry is still trying to sort of get a hang of it. Of course, the virgin material tends to always be more expensive than the recycled material, because that's what we have inherited from the past. That recycled material has less of a performance, so it cannot be as expensive as virgin or be matched with virgin. So there's a tendency that it's usually below the virgin price, 10-20% below it. It depends again on the quality. However, we've seen with this trend and ecosystem that has been growing, we've seen markets in Europe where we have seen the PCR being more expensive than the virgin material. And now, why is that? That is really because the consumer starts demanding it. And if we look back in history, we've seen many attempts by industry players trying to move into a more sustainable value chain and using recycled material in their value chains. And they've always been disrupted because of the volatilities and the price points of PCR trying to compete with virgin. And I think this time, or at that time, the consumer at mass was not as aware as we are today. And I think, therefore, the consumer, it's really in the consumer's hand to drive the demand and the pricing of PCR. And so I foresee a future that across the globe, this PCR at some point will detach itself, because it becomes its own commodity, and the consumer, when going into the store, is buying a packaging because it's made out of sustainable plastic, recycled material plastic, and they can contribute to a greater world because of that.
Great. Okay, cool. And moving on to one from, Abigail. Do you see Africa as similar to the rest of the world in this aspect, with closed value chains, or different to other parts?
Well, I think what I see that we have the opportunity here in African markets or other emerging markets is that we can leapfrog. So if you look at the global spectrum of the ecosystem of using recycled material in their packaging, in developed countries like in Europe or in the United States, they're fighting through existing systems that they need to change. Yeah. In the beauty here in emerging markets, we have a very simple system, if a system at all, right? That is very informal. So if we look at the change and the movement into a circular economy, we actually can leapfrog right into it. And I think that's what I see, the really, really great opportunity for these markets here, that we can do it right from day one. And so that's what us as a company, one of other companies, there are many great initiatives out there that sort of trying to tackle that model. We want to make sure as we move into this and as we shift into this, we don't forget about this informal market that relies on that. And so that's why it's really our core that we include the informal market and formalize them and make them part of this circular plastics economy in emerging markets. Great,
great. And now one from Charles Campbell-Claus. Can you recycle recycled material? Is it a continuous process or just a one-off?
Very good question. So there are different studies around. However, if you have to start distinguishing, and that's now becoming more technical, I'm happy to give you more context there, but you have to distinguish between the mechanical way of recycling, which is sort of chipping down the product, melting it down, filter it, and then bring it back into the cycle. And if you look at the mechanical recycling process, there are voices that say between 10 and 20 times you can recycle it. So you can recycle the recycled material 10 to 20 times. Now, but there's also now a new trend that is coming that is so-called chemical recycling process. And as we look at today, the technologies that are there that are able to actually, the over recycled material, so to speak, that goes beyond 20 times, you could bring into the chemical recycling process that completely decomposes the polymer into its monomer and then sticks it back together so it becomes virgin and it goes to the top of the value chain. So there are a lot of working streams happening there. And as long as chemical recycling is still using a lot of energy, it's still more viable to go into the mechanical recycling process before you feed it into the chemical. So those are very complementary recycling processes that will sort of facilitate that change and enable that you can recycle again and again and again.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for another couple of questions. So if anyone has any kind of specific ones on this question and answer kind of function on the webinar, then do vote. We can make sure we answer the most pertinent ones first. I'm just taking kind of a few random guesses. The next one is from Dipesh Pabari. I'm guessing this is related to Kenya. The government has reversed the tax incentive for recycling recently. Is this a temporary issue as government looks to raise funds, or is it going to be a big step back for recycling incentives?
Well, I think, I mean, I will answer this question really quickly. I think what recycling should happen, not just because of an incentive of a government tax. I think what we want to demonstrate is recycling can be profitable even if we have normal tax rates, and I think that's what we want to contribute as a business. If it helps to kickstart the business, of course, why not? So I wouldn't depend a decision of moving into recycling business based on what tax regimes are for it. So I think that's sort of a very separate conversation to have. And I believe that actually recycling, the more you can prove that it's sustainable and profitable in itself, competing with any other manufacturing business, you will have more investments coming in and you will be able to systematically change the way we do it.
Okay, great. And then perhaps one more. I saw one that I thought was quite interesting here. Pre-COVID, especially the focus at the K Fair, which is a big exhibition in Germany, it was the closed loop circular economy. Do you feel that post-COVID period will put the focus on the back burner whilst what the world tries to right itself?
Well, I think, no, I think I had the privilege to be at the K show as well, myself and with my co-founder, and we were, of course, very, very surprised on how everyone is riding the train of circular economy and how this is such a big topic right now. I think what it comes down to, I think the K show is every 3 years, 2 years or something like that. What it comes down to now is who has been actually doing it, and I think that's what we will see in the next K show is we will see examples, hopefully like ourselves, that show at scale and industrial scale that it is possible to be a circular economy, and this will increase the tremendous pressure that the industry needs to sort of transition into. So I foresee actually that that it's very important that it has happened, that pre-COVID, that everyone is talking about, but now I think tackling it as an opportunity to systematically change in this new world order that we're facing, I think this is a great example on what we could do from a resource perspective, from an impact perspective, socially and environmentally. Okay, great. I mean, I think that's we've just gone over half an hour now, so that's kind of a good time to call it. I'm sure Keiran would be more than happy if people reached out directly to answer any more questions. And Keiran, are you all right with us sharing the presentation to anyone that is? Yes, absolutely. We'll share the presentation. You just let me know where to share it, and then everyone can have a look at it. Right. For sure.
But firstly, can I just say to you, Keiran, thank you very much for agreeing to speak and speaking so well. It's always very interesting to hear from people like yourselves who are kind of cemented within the industry. So thank you from us. Thank you to over 100 people that have attended. I think we were on 140 odd at some point. Obviously, get down as a group, and that's fantastic. And thank you very much for your interest. And we wish you all the best in the future. We will be sending more details about future webinars. We're going to try and do these on a weekly basis. So in the next couple of days, we'll get information out to everyone about what the next subject and next speakers are. So do keep your eye out for that. But yeah, thank you very much to everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. We will see you soon, hopefully when this is all over nice and soon. So yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, also from our side, stay healthy, stay safe. All the best. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.